I was standing in a hospital hallway holding a bill I couldn't pay when my phone buzzed with a real estate alert I never signed up for. "Congratulations on your new property," it read, followed by an address I didn't recognize on a lake 3 hours north of us. $48,000. Closed that morning. My husband's name listed as sole buyer. 3 days earlier, sitting across from me at our own kitchen table, that same husband had told me, without blinking, that we didn't have $5,500 to spare for our daughter's surgery. I stood in that hallway with fluorescent lights humming overhead and a hospital gift shop teddy bear tucked under my arm, and I read that notification 4 separate times before the words actually rearranged themselves into something I could process. $48,000 for a cabin. $5,500 we apparently didn't have for our daughter's spine. I didn't cry. I want to tell you I did, because I think that's what people expect, but what I actually felt was a strange, focused stillness, the kind of quiet you get right before you decide something you can't undo. I slid the phone into my coat pocket, walked back into my daughter's hospital room, and sat down beside her bed like nothing in the world had just cracked open underneath me. But to understand how I ended up in that hallway, you need to know what the 6 weeks before it actually looked like. My name is Danielle Reyes, and before any of this, my life had the specific, unremarkable rhythm of a family that mostly worked. I managed the billing department at a dermatology practice in Tulsa, the kind of job that came with decent insurance and absolutely no glamour, and I was fine with that trade. My husband, Marcus, sold industrial equipment for a manufacturing supplier, on the road 3 or 4 days most weeks, home just enough that our marriage had settled into something that functioned more like a well-run partnership than a romance. Check-ins by text, a shared calendar, a Sunday phone call to plan the week ahead. We'd met at a mutual friend's wedding 11 years earlier, back when I was 2 years into my job at the practice and he was just starting out in equipment sales. He had an easy, unhurried confidence that I found grounding at the time, the kind of person who never seemed rattled by anything, which I mistook, for a long while, for genuine steadiness rather than simple distance. By the time we married, I believed I knew exactly who I was building a life with. I understand now that I knew the version of him he was comfortable showing me, and that those two things aren't always the same. We had one daughter, B, 8 years old, sharp-tongued in the way only a kid raised around adults learns to be, obsessed that year with a card game she'd invented herself with rules so complicated even she sometimes forgot them mid-round. B had scoliosis, diagnosed at 6, monitored carefully for 2 years with the kind of watchful patience pediatric orthopedists specialize in, regular x-rays, a back brace she hated and wore anyway because I promised her ice cream on brace check days, and a curve that had, until recently, stayed within the range doctors call manageable. Marcus and I had been married 10 years. We weren't the kind of couple who still held hands in grocery store aisles, but we had our own version of steady, a running joke about his terrible taste in road trip podcasts, a shared understanding that neither of us needed the other to fill every silence. I trusted that steadiness completely. It never once occurred to me it could be built on a foundation I hadn't actually seen. BEA's curve jumped 9 degrees in 4 months, a number her orthopedist, Dr. Okafor, delivered to us with the specific gravity doctors reserve for information they know is about to reorder your entire life. She pulled up the 2 x-rays side by side on her monitor, the 4-month-old spine next to the current one, close enough for us to see the difference without her needing to say much at all. "At this rate of progression," she said, sliding the imaging across her desk, "I want to move forward with spinal fusion surgery within the next 2 months. Waiting longer increases the risk we're looking at a much more invasive procedure down the line." "What happens if her curve keeps progressing before then?" Marcus asked. "We'd be looking at a longer fusion, a harder recovery, and a higher risk of complications," Dr. Okafor said. "I'd like to move quickly, and I'd like her scheduled within the surgical window I have open in 6 weeks. Marcus reached for my hand under the desk the way he always had for 10 years whenever bad news landed in a room. "Whatever she needs," he said, "we'll figure it out." I believed him instantly and completely. That's the part one keeps circling back to, even now, not that he lied, but that believing him had never once required effort before. Insurance covered most of the surgical costs, but our plan carved out a chunk of the surgeon's out-of-network fees, a detail so buried in fine print that even the billing coordinator I worked alongside every day at my own job hadn't caught it until she ran the numbers herself. The gap between us and BEA's surgery date came to $5,500, modest against the total bill, but entirely non-negotiable if we wanted to keep her slot on Dr. Okafor's timeline. I brought it to Marcus that Thursday night, laptop open on the kitchen table, BEA's card game rules taped haphazardly to the fridge behind us. They need it in full by the 20th, I said. That's 6 weeks. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I'd learned over a decade meant he was stalling. Things have been tighter than usual since the territory changes, he said. Let me see what we've actually got. Marcus. This is BEA's spine. This isn't a let me see situation. I know exactly what it is, Danielle. His voice sharpened just enough that I backed off for the night, telling myself he needed room to think it through, not pressure. A week passed. Then another. Every time I raised it, the answer shrank a little more, from let me look into it to it's not that simple to, one Tuesday with dishes still soaking in the sink, we don't have it right now, and I don't know what else you want me to say. I want you to find it, I said. I'll pick up billing overtime. I'll sell something. I don't care what it takes. She needs this by the 20th. You think I'm not thinking about this too? You think this doesn't keep me up at night? His voice rose sharper than the moment called for, and something about the defensiveness of it, rather than any real answer, was the first thing that actually unsettled me. Then show me you're thinking about it, I said. Not with words. With a number. He didn't have a number. He never did, that whole conversation, and I let it go that night the same way I'd let it go every night before it, telling myself patience was a virtue instead of recognizing it, in hindsight, as a habit he was quietly counting on. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Maybe we ask your mother. My mother had already helped us once before, years earlier, during a stretch when Marcus's commission dried up entirely for 3 months. I hated the idea of asking again. But I would have asked anyone, 100 times over, if it meant BEA's surgery happened on schedule. What I didn't know, sitting at that kitchen table, was that the $5,500 Marcus claimed didn't exist was, at that exact moment, sitting untouched in an account he'd opened without me 9 months earlier, an account that would, within 3 weeks, become the down payment on a cabin. My best friend since college, Priya, came by that Saturday with takeout and the specific bluntness she'd perfected over 15 years of friendship. She sat across from me at the counter while I stress-organized a pantry that didn't need organizing. He said no, I told her. Not exactly no. He said he'd handle it, and then he just stopped handling it. Priya was quiet for a second, which from Priya is its own kind of alarm. Danielle, she finally said, when's the last time you actually looked at his commission statements? Not heard about them from him. Looked at them yourself. I opened my mouth to answer and realized, with a small cold jolt, that I genuinely couldn't remember. Marcus had handled our finances almost since the beginning, a habit born out of convenience during the years I was working overtime just to keep our insurance premiums manageable, one that had quietly hardened into something neither of us ever questioned again. You're not saying what I think you're saying, I said. I'm not saying anything specific, she said. I'm saying ask to see them. That's all. Just ask. He wouldn't do that, Priya. Whatever this is, it's not that. Okay, she said, in the tone of someone who's decided arguing further won't help tonight. We ate takeout on the porch until almost 10, talking about anything that wasn't the number sitting between us and the 20th, BEA's increasingly elaborate card game rules, a coworker's disastrous first date, anything ordinary enough to hold onto for an hour. It was the last easy evening I had for a long time, and I didn't know it while I was having it. I didn't ask Marcus that weekend. I told myself Priya didn't know the full picture, that 10 years of marriage had earned him more benefit of the doubt than one tense conversation could erase. I went to bed convinced he'd come through in his own frustrating, last-minute way, the way he usually did. That was the false hope. It lasted exactly 10 more days. The deadline moved from 6 weeks to 4 in the way time behaves differently when your child's body is the thing at stake, every day both crawling by and disappearing at once. B, for her part, understood only that she was getting a surgery to help her back stand up straighter, a phrase Dr. Okafor had chosen with real care, and she'd started drawing pictures of herself standing perfectly upright in a superhero cape, taping them next to her card game rules on the fridge. I looked at those drawings every single day while running numbers in my head that stubbornly refused to add up. I picked up every overtime shift the practice would give me. I sold my car and drove Marcus's old sedan for 2 weeks until I found a used one for $1,000 off a coworker. I sold a set of earrings my late father had given me for my college graduation, $310 from a pawn shop that smelled like machine oil, handed over by a man who barely glanced up from his phone. Piece by piece, I clawed together $3,400. I was $2,100 short with 10 days left on the clock, and every time I asked Marcus for an update, the answer got shorter and colder. "I'm working on financing something," he said the last time I asked directly. "It's not as simple as writing a check, Danielle." It was, in fact, exactly that simple. I just didn't know it yet. The real estate alert came the following Monday, in that hospital hallway, teddy bear tucked under my arm, be napping off a round of pre-op blood work down the corridor behind me. $48,000. Sole buyer. I spent the next 2 days doing something I'd never once done in 10 years of marriage, quietly, methodically checking. I found, tucked in a shared cloud folder labeled Taxes 2023, a signed purchase agreement dated 3 weeks earlier for a 2-bedroom cabin on Grand Lake, closing date 11 days out from the day I found it. The down payment, $19,000, had come from an account under Marcus's name only, the same account that had somehow never once had room for our daughter's surgery. I didn't confront him immediately. I know that surprises people, because fury is supposed to arrive instantly, and mine didn't. What arrived instead was the same steady, procedural clarity I use running a billing dispute at work: the number is what it is, and panicking about it changes nothing about the math underneath it. I called Dr. Okafor's office first and asked, plainly, what happened if we missed the deadline. The scheduling coordinator told me, gently, that losing the slot meant the next available opening was likely 4 months out, an unacceptable stretch given how quickly BEA's curve had already progressed. Then I called my mother and asked, for the second time in our marriage, if she could help. She said yes before I even finished the sentence, the kind of immediate yes that made me cry harder than almost anything else that entire week. Between my mother's contribution, my overtime pay, and the pawn shop money, I closed the gap to within $300 of what we needed, 10 days before BEA's surgery. That was the moment the ground fully shifted under me, not the real estate alert, not the cabin itself, but the realization that I had found nearly the entire amount without Marcus, and he still hadn't said one true word to me about where the money he claimed we didn't have had actually gone. I confronted Marcus on a Wednesday night, after B was asleep, my laptop open on the kitchen table to the purchase agreement I'd found, the closing notification, and a printed statement showing the account he'd never once mentioned. "Sit down," I said. He sat. Something in his face told me part of him already knew this conversation was coming. "Explain the cabin," I said. He tried the deflection first, an investment property, something for us to grow into once things settled down, a surprise he'd been planning to reveal at the right moment. I let him talk until he ran out of road, then turned the laptop toward him, the closing date circled in red. 11 days out. The exact same window our daughter had spent waiting on a number he swore didn't exist. You told me we didn't have $5,500 for BEA's surgery, I said, and my voice stayed steadier than I expected it to. You had $48,000 for a lake house, Marcus. It's not what it looks like, I was going to tell you once. Once what? I said. Once the closing was already done? Tell me exactly when the right moment was supposed to be. He didn't have an answer. His jaw worked like he was still searching for one. Was any part of this ever going to include me? I asked. Or was the whole point that it wouldn't? I was trying to build something, he said, and even he seemed to hear how thin it sounded once it left his mouth. You built something for yourself, I said. There's a pre-op room down the hall from where I found out about it. I need you to understand something, I said, quieter now, though no less firm. I have already found nearly the entire amount without you. I sold my car. I sold my father's earrings. I asked my mother for help for the second time in this marriage, and she said yes before I finished asking. BEA's surgery is happening on the 20th whether you're actually present for this family or not. I love her, Danielle. You know I do. I know you love the version of loving her that doesn't cost you anything, I said, and the sentence left me before I'd fully decided to say it out loud. It was the truest thing I'd said all night, and once it was out, I understood it was also the sentence that ended our marriage, whether either of us admitted that yet or not. He tried, weakly, to explain the account as something he'd meant to fold back into our shared savings once it made sense financially. I let him talk. None of it changed the closing date sitting 11 days away, or the surgery date sitting 10 days away, or the plain fact that he had chosen, over and over, deliberately, to let one of those dates matter more to him than the other. The fallout moved fast once it started. Marcus didn't cancel the cabin purchase, a detail that told me more than any conversation could have. He closed on it as scheduled, the same week as BEA's surgery, and moved a significant portion of his things there within the month. I learned later, in a conversation I never asked to have, that a coworker of his named Sasha had visited that cabin more than once before the ink on the purchase agreement had even dried. I won't pretend that detail didn't gut me freshly all over again. It did. But by the time I learned it, I'd already stopped being surprised by what Marcus was capable of hiding from me. Priya showed up the morning after the confrontation with coffee and, for once, absolutely nothing to say that tried to fix it. She sat with me at the counter while I finished the last of the pre-surgery paperwork, and when I finally broke down, 2 days later than I expected to, folding BEA's hospital gown laundry, of all things, she didn't tell me it would be fine. She said, "You did the thing that needed doing." That's not small. That's actually the whole thing. I keep thinking I should have asked to see the accounts years ago, I told her. Pushed harder. Paid closer attention. Priya shook her head. You gave him 10 years and a sick kid's surgery deadline. That's not a woman who didn't give enough chances. She squeezed my hand the way she had on the porch weeks earlier, except this time it meant something entirely different. He's the one who ran out of them. We found the final $300 through a coworker collection at the dermatology practice, organized without my knowledge by the office manager, who handed me an envelope on a Friday afternoon with 22 names signed on a card, most of them people I saw daily and barely knew outside of work. I cried reading those names harder than I'd cried through almost anything else in the entire ordeal. BEA's surgery happened on the 20th, exactly as scheduled. I sat in the surgical waiting room with Priya beside me, holding my hand through nearly 4 hours that felt endless, every set of double doors opening making my whole body tense before I could even register whether it was the right doctor. Until Dr. Okafor finally walked out in scrubs with an expression that told me everything before she said a single word. "It went exactly the way we hoped," she said. "Clean fusion. She's going to heal beautifully." I don't fully remember standing up. I remember Priya catching my elbow, actually, because my legs had apparently decided to stop cooperating the moment the relief actually landed. B woke up groggy that evening, blinking against the fluorescent light, and the very first thing she did, before she even said a word, was reach for the drawing of her superhero-caped self that I'd taped to the wall beside her bed. She stared at it for a second, then looked at me and asked, in a voice thick with anesthesia, "Am I standing up straight now?" "You're going to, baby," I told her. "Your back's all fixed." She smiled and was asleep again within 30 seconds, the drawing still crumpled slightly in her hand. It's been 9 months now. The divorce isn't finalized, these things move slower than anyone warns you they will, but custody is settled, and Marcus sees B every other weekend, which she still, somehow, looks forward to with the uncomplicated love kids seem to hold on to longer than the adults around them deserve. I don't try to talk her out of that love. It was never mine to take from her. I sold the house eventually and moved B and myself into a smaller place across town, close enough to Priya that she shows up unannounced most weeks with either wine or a new takeout order, depending on how the week has gone. Our new kitchen barely fits a table for two, and I've noticed I don't miss the extra space at all. There was never a version of that bigger house that actually felt shared equally to begin with. BEA's follow-up scans have all come back clean. Her curve has held steady, exactly the way Dr. Okafor hoped it would, and she's back to inventing increasingly baffling card games with rules that change mid-round depending entirely on her mood. Last month she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, checked her posture the way Dr. Okafor taught her to, and announced with total satisfaction, straight as a ruler, before running off to demand a rematch. I picked up a part-time role training new billing staff on top of my regular hours, partly for the money, partly because I discovered somewhere in the middle of all this that I like helping someone else make sense of numbers that feel overwhelming, a skill I had to relearn how to use on my own life first. I don't know how to tell you this story ends with everything wrapped up the way it should. It doesn't. There are still nights I lie awake doing math I don't need to do anymore. There are still mornings I reach out of habit for a pair of earrings that aren't there. There are still moments some innocent detail, a lake house rental ad, the smell of a certain cologne in a grocery store aisle, knocks the wind out of me for reasons I don't always bother explaining to anyone. Some of that, I think, just stays with you, and I've stopped waiting for it not to. What I have instead is a daughter standing straighter than she has in years, a friend who shows up without needing to be asked, and a version of myself I don't think I would have found any other way, the version who found $5,500 one shift, one sale, one hard conversation at a time, without ever needing anyone else's cabin to build a life that was actually mine. Some people show you exactly who they are with a single closing document. I've come to think the ones who show you quietly, in the moment it costs them the most, are the only ones worth believing.